Hi, welcome to this Blender video tutorial entitled Bezier Curves and Circles Extrusion. Because the Bezier curve is so flexible and so easy to control, it's often used to model shapes that in turn are extruded. To demonstrate this technique, I've placed in my Blender background an image of the Open Source Initiative logo. I'm also in top orthographic view. Now this is a simple shape, but the technique can be easily applied to more complex shapes. I'll zoom in a little bit on the logo image, and I'll add a Bezier curve object. Then I will tab into Edit mode. I'll select the end control point and place it on the logo here. I'll select the other end control point and place it down here on the logo. I'll then select both control points and press Shift-H to place the handles into auto mode. I'll then select the front end control point and hold my control key down and click on the left part of the logo, adding another control point. I'll add another control point on the top of the logo and another control point to the right side of the logo and another control point on the bottom right of the logo. In this process, I am just roughing in the control points. I'll add another control point at the right bottom of the inside circle of the logo, and another at the top of the inside circle, and another on the left of the inside circle. Now in the Object Data Properties panel for the curve object, I'll checkmark the Cyclic U checkbox in the Active Spline panel. This closes the spline. Now because this is still a 3D shape curve, the surface is not displayed. I'll go back to the 3D display and select all of the control points and press the H key, making all the handles free black-colored handles. I'll then adjust the handles of the Bezier curve to correspond to the shape of the logo. Now that the shape has been defined by the closed Bezier spline, I'll change the shape from 3D to 2D. This will add a displayed surface to the curve object. I'll tab out of Edit mode and turn off the background image. We now have a two-dimensional surfaced shape. I'll go to the Object Data Properties panel for the curve, and in the Geometry panel, increase the extrusion setting to 1 Blender unit. This extrudes the curved surface. I'll add a bevel to the surfaces by setting the bevel control to 0.35. I can round off that bevel by increasing the bevel resolution. I'll set the bevel resolution at 3, which nicely rounds off the bevel. Now I'll set the resolution back to 0, and the bevel back to 0, and the extrusion back to 0. And I'll go to top view. One of the interesting characteristics of a curve object is that the surface generated by a closed 2D spline will exclude any other closed 2D spline within the same object. To demonstrate this, I'll tab into Edit mode, and while in Edit mode, I'll add a Bezier circle to the curve object. Note that the circle is cut out of the curved surface. I'll alter this shape a bit. I'll now tab out of Edit mode, and in the Geometry panel, I'll set the extrusion at 1, the bevel depth at 0.35, and the bevel resolution at 3. I'll tab back into Edit mode and go to Wireframe View. Note that we can still edit the control points and the handles. I'll tab out of Edit mode and go back to Solid Display mode. I will name this curve object Open Source Logo. Now if we look at the Outliner panel, we see that the Open Source Logo object is a curve object and it has a curve data block attached to it. Like mesh objects, Blender curve objects can have materials and textures applied to them. I'll click on the Materials Context button in the Properties panel and add a new material to the Open Source Logo object. I'll name this material Open Source. I'll set the diffuse color to green. I'll click on the Texture Context button in the Properties panel and I'll add a new texture. I'll name this texture Marble. I'll click on the Type button and select Image or Movie. I'll click on the Open button and select the marble t.gif image located on my desktop. Now in the Image Mapping panel, I'll set the X repeat to 2. And in the Mapping panel, I'll set the Generated Projection to Cube. I'll then turn on Layer 2, which contains a camera and some lighting objects. And then I'll render the scene. If we look at the Outliner panel, we see that the Open Source Curve object has a curve data block to which is attached a material named Open Source, which contains a texture named Marble, which uses an image file named marblet.gif. Now in some situations we may want to use some of Blender's mesh tools to further refine a curved object. To do this, we must first convert the curve object to a mesh object. This is done by selecting the object and pressing Alt-C, which displays the Convert menu. Select Convert Mesh from Curve. This will convert the curve object to a mesh object. The conversion is based on the curve object's resolution setting. Note that we no longer have access to the curve object data properties controls. And in the Outliner panel, it shows that the Open Source Logo object is now a mesh object. If I tab into Edit mode, I now have access to all of the vertices, edges, and faces that comprise the mesh object.